I'd like to call this Development Planning Committee meeting of Monday, April the 15th to order. Just before we deal with the official business of the meeting, just want to acknowledge that there was a tragedy in our community yesterday. And we all feel the effects of that. And I know that our thoughts are certainly with the family, with the church congregation, and with others who feel touched by what happened. We certainly appreciate the support of all of the officials who took part in calming what happened. RCMP, our local fire department, ambulance, medevac. The professionals did their job and settled and made sure the site was secure. So our message to our residents is we have been told that the attack was a targeted attack, that there is a person of interest that is in custody presently. And so we've been told by the RCMP there is not reason for residents to be worried, and that we're going to move forward from here. But our thoughts are certainly with the family, especially this morning. We'll move on with our official business on our planning agenda. Staff, do you have any additions to the agenda this morning?
None from staff, Your Worship.
Okay, thank you. Council, any additions to the agenda? Seeing none, is there any disclosure of interest? Councillor Flynn.
Thank you, Your Worship. Item 5.1, the Brown family are clients of mine for employee benefits and personal insurance, so I will step out.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other disclosure of interest? Okay. Councillor Flynn, I'll start with item 5.1. So if you need to leave, please go ahead. We have a proposed motion on the screen. If there would be a mover and seconder, we can move forward. Councillor Lavery, thank you. Councillor Wallace-Richmond. I'd ask the administrator please to read the motion.
Moved by Councillor Lavery, seconded by Councillor Wallace-Richmond, that the Development and Planning Services Committee recommends to Council that a bylaw be prepared, adoption of which would amend zoning bylaw 2303 by rezoning lot 10, plan 31502 from R1 single family to R8 residential suite zone, and that final reading be withheld subject to the following. Number 1, registration of a covenant ensuring a detached suite is not permitted, and number 2, confirmation that the proposed suite meets zoning bylaw and BC Building Code requirements.
Thank you. I'll ask the Director of Development Services to explain the proposal.
Your Worship, the property under application is in the Raven subdivision. This subdivision was created back in the 1980s. It's one of the larger lots in Raven. It's about half an acre in size. And the proposal is to rezone it from R1 single family residential to R8 residential suite zone. There's a subdivision application in the works at the moment, and Council recently approved a variance on this property to reduce the minimum panhandle width from 52nd Avenue Northeast. And there is a single family dwelling on the property with a suite in it, and we became aware of that after the application was made. And because we are aware of a suite in the house, we require the suite to meet BC Building Code before the property can be rezoned to R8. So that's a condition that was made known to the applicant, and they're agreeable to that, and they're also agreeable to putting a covenant on the property to say that proposed lot 2 cannot have a detached suite.
Terrific, thank you very much. I would ask the representative of the applicant if you would like to come forward and talk with us at all.
I'll answer any questions that council may have.
Okay, thank you. I will turn it over to council then. Council, do you have any questions for either the applicant or for staff at this time? Okay, seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. We'll invite Councillor Flynn back in. Councillor Cannon?
I just have a question in regards to 5.2. Would I have a conflict if my daughter and son-in-law live on the edge of this property?
No.
No? Okay.
Thank you for
just
checking though,
wanted to
Councillor
double
Cannon.
check.
It's always good to check. Okay, we have a proposed motion regarding item 5.2. Could I have a mover and seconder? Councillor Cannon, Councillor Eliason, thank you. We'll have the administrator read the motion.
Moved by Councillor Cannon, seconded by Councillor Eliason, that the Development and Planning Services Committee recommends to Council that a bylaw be prepared, adoption of which would amend zoning bylaw 2303 by rezoning Lot 2, Plan 19098 from R1 Single Family to R8 Residential Suite Zone.
Thank you. I'll ask the Director of Development Services to explain the proposal.
Your worship, the property under application is located along 20th Avenue Southeast, just east of the new Byers View subdivision. On the south side of the road is ALR A2 zoned acreages. It's a rather long and narrow lot, and it's presently zoned R1 with a single family dwelling. And the applicant, Wayne Raspberry, would like to rezone it to R8 to accommodate a residential suite of some sort. It's certainly large enough for a detached suite or a secondary suite in the house. And we included in the report an old pre-plan for a subdivision involving this property that would require the adjacent property to the east to be combined with that. We just wanted to include that so everybody is aware that the property has subdivision potential if it's amalgamated with a lot to the east.
Great, thank you very much. Good morning, Wayne. Did you want to come forward and share anything more with us? Come right on up to the mic, Wayne, and then I'll be able to hear you well.
Sure. Okay, my intention is just to prepare it for R8 and possibly down the road to make it possible to subdivide it. And that's just what I'm doing right now with, I'm looking into the possibilities with Franklin Engineering, so. But that's where it sits right now, so just trying to get, so the home which my son lives in right now, we could put a secondary suite in anyways primarily, so. And that's about all I have to add to it, I think.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll see if there's questions from council. Council, do you have any questions for Mr. Raspberry or for staff? Okay. Wayne, can I just ask, first of all, I understand the short future and going to R8, putting a suite in, which is great. Thank you for coming forward and rezoning. Is there any thoughts to the plan and amalgamation with the lot beside? Is that something in the future that you're thinking about, or?
I have approached the neighbor to the east, and they, at this time, they have no interest in doing anything. Franklin Engineering feels that we can do a strata without their participation, so, and upgrade the services, and the hydro needs to be changed. You know, it's antiquated, and they are thinking about doing some changes now along the west side of the property line. So there's overhead trespasses that need to be addressed. So I'm trying to get in a position where they can deal with that now, at least also. So that's kind of where we're at. I'm looking at it with Franklin, and would have to put a proposal, and you know, the council would have to look at it and see if they agree, planning committee, so. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. I think, you know, just from my own point of view, this is a big piece of land in an area of high interest with lots of infrastructure, so certainly would be something that I would be interested in if you choose to move forward. Council, do you have any other questions? Okay, all those in favor? Passed unanimously. Thank you very much.
I do have a rough draft of what Franklin kind of came up with, if anybody'd like to look at it now, or
Okay, if you would pass that to the planning staff, that would be super, and they can share with us.
it's just a rough draft, it's not a finished, and so it just gives everyone just kind of gives you an idea of what we were thinking, and this is 20th to here, so. Just so everybody's on board, I spoke to Denise in planning and kind of explained to her too, so.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll move forward to item 5.3, zoning amendment application number 1150. We have a proposed motion. Could I have a mover and seconder? Councillor Wallace Richmond, Councillor Lavery, thank you. I'll ask the administrator please to read the motion.
Moved by Councillor Wallace Richmond, seconded by Councillor Lavery, that the Development and Planning Services Committee recommends to Council that a bylaw be prepared, adoption of which would amend zoning bylaw 2303 as follows. Add the defined term assisted living, housing, and dining area to the list of permitted uses in the R4 medium density residential zone and renumber the balance accordingly. And number 2, add a new section 9.11.3, which would state the maximum density in the R4 zone may be increased to a maximum of 50 dwelling units per hectare for the provision of assisted living housing, and that a bylaw be prepared, adoption of which would amend zoning bylaw 2303 as follows. Add the term assisted living housing and dining area to the list of permitted uses in the R5 high density residential zone and renumber the balance accordingly. And add the following, section 10.11.3, the maximum density in the R5 zone may be increased to a maximum of 130 dwelling units per hectare for the provision of assisted living housing.
Great, thank you very much. I'll ask the Director of Development Services to speak to this.
Your Worship, this is a proposed amendment, text amendment to the zoning bylaw being initiated by the Development Services Department. And there's 2 parts to the bylaw. One is to include assisted living housing and the definition of dining area, and to increase the density in the R4 zone from 40 units per hectare to 50 units per hectare for a density bonus. And in the R5 zone to add assisted living housing and dining area as a permitted use to the R5 zone, and to allow for an increase in density from 100 units per hectare to 130 units per hectare. And this is something that that I've been wanting to do for a number of years, probably for the last 6 years. It's one of about probably 20 or 30 text amendments that have been itemized for updates to the zoning bylaw, which we haven't been able to do, and because of other things. But this is a timely point in time to initiate this because of the announcement by BC Housing for a $7 million project, which we know may be on the property at 250 Fifth Avenue Southwest, the vacant land where a development permit was approved last summer for 3 buildings with 97 units for multifamily. If BC Housing and Canadian Mental Health Association partner themselves and with the developer Kanzea, with Graham Richardson, an announcement by BC Housing is anticipated on May 17th. So at the moment, it's not a sure thing or a done deal on that property. But if it is announced, then this text amendment to the zoning bylaw would accommodate approximately 1/3 of the units which are intended to be assisted living housing units, with the remaining 2/3 of the units multifamily.
Great, thank you very much. It may be appropriate if there is representatives from BC Housing. There is an attached appendix, Appendix 8, and while these amendments to the zone are not particularly specific to that letter, is there anyone that would like to come forward and speak to that at all at this time? Good morning, Dawn. Nice to see you.
Morning. So the question is about the package that was, so the letter was sent out in the neighbors. I believe most of them received it on Friday. There was also some information in regards to supportive housing that was included. And so our intention is, yes, is CMHA is in the process of buying the land off of Kanzia. And about 6 months ago, BC Housing announced that we were awarded 70 units of the mixed housing. And that is going to be started being built in July. And then it's our intention to also put the third building as supportive housing, pending this text amendment.
Great, thank you very much. Is there any questions for Dawn at this time? Okay, thank you, and thanks for coming and speaking to the letter.
No worries.
Does council have any questions for staff or comments? Councillor Lavery.
Yes, thanks, Mayor Harrison. And actually, this is a bit of a sidebar here, and I fully support what's being presented in front of us, so thank you for this. I think it's a really important text amendment. My question actually refers to Good Samaritan. So I know in the very thorough report, we've talked about creating CD zones for assisted living. So it's a clarification question for me. Was Good Samaritan there because of it was a P3 or a public piece of land, or what was the designation for them to get their zoning? Just so I have a fuller picture. And it does not relate particularly to the motion in front of us, but I've been asked that question. I wasn't sure of the answer.
Oh, fair question. Director of Development Services.
Thanks, Your Worship. It is related. And I should have mentioned there's a history to the definition of assisted living housing, but I didn't know if you wanted me to get into the history or not. But I'll speak to it because it is related to your question. Around the early 2000s, when the provincial government at that time was privatizing a bunch of things, including liquor stores and care homes, at that time, care homes were permitted under the P3 institutional zone. And the definition for a rest home in P3 is a licensed care facility. So a facility that is fully licensed under the Community Care and Assisted Living Act of the Ministry of Health. And then when things started to get privatized or quasi-privatized with P3 public-private partnerships, we created the assisted living housing use. And the first proposal was either Lakeside Manor or Piccadilly Terrace. It's in the report.
Piccadilly Terrace.
Piccadilly Terrace was the first one. It was the first CD zone in the city, CD1. And we included assisted living housing in that CD zone in a high density area. And that definition is consistent with the high density OCP policies, which also support a density bonus. And then after that development, the next one was Lakeside Manor. That was the next CD zone. And then there was Landers Lodge in the downtown core, or in the residential core area, a few blocks from City Hall. This development here across from the senior center and the daycare. Here's Piccadilly Terrace. Here's Lakeside Manor, and this is Andover Terrace. They're the 4 CD zones in the city with assisted living housing. Andover Terrace is R4. Hillside is P3 because it's a fully licensed care facility. And at that time, when it was rezoned, it was thought that P3 would be the best zone for that, for the same reason as the development right across from the daycare in behind here. The latest one that was just finished, that is also zone P3 as well, institutional, because that's a fully licensed care facility. And same with the rest home at the corner of 10th Avenue and 10th Street Southwest, just south of this development here, Piccadilly something or other on the corner. So that one is P3 too, and that's a fully licensed care facility where these assisted living housing facilities may or may not be licensed. They can be public or they can be private. It's a flexible definition. And the term dining area nested in that definition has a requirement for a common kitchen and common dining area of 1.4, a minimum of 1.4 square meters per number of occupants, something like that. And that's consistent with, at the time, it was consistent with IHA's standards for a common kitchen. And if you look at the definition of assisted living housing, it's open in terms of who can live in a facility. It's not mutually exclusive to any socioeconomic class of person. So it does not drill down into people's backgrounds or anything like that. It's a land use. It's not people.
Councillor Wallace Richmond?
Thank you, Worship. I have a question.
She pushed your button again, sorry, I made a mistake.
There.
Again?
It's on.
Oh, there you go.
Thanks, Your Worship. I have a question about the increase in density. So both R4 and R5 would increase in density under these text amendments?
Director of Development Services?
Yes, and that increase is consistent with the OCP, which supports assisted living housing in the R5 and R4 zoned areas.
Yes.
By that much.
And it would go from 40 to 50? Did I read that right?
It could.
Okay.
The maximum.
The maximum. And how, so if an applicant were to ask for a rezone to R4, what is the process? That density is only bonused if in fact it will be assisted living, or can it be retroactive if somebody wanted to retrofit an existing R4?
That's a good question. If they retrofitted, they'd have to have the common dining area meet that minimum 1.4 meters per occupant load.
Okay, so it could have an impact on existing R4 and R5?
Only if somebody is able to retrofit it and meet building code.
Right, okay. Well, that's good to hear. I think it's compassionate, consistent with the OCP, and very forward-looking in terms of the changing nature of housing. So thank you for bringing this to us.
Thank you, Councillor Wallace Richmond. Any other questions or comments from council? Okay. Councillor Lavery?
Yes, thanks, Mayor Harrison. I was just waiting for comments, and so there's a lot. This text amendment in front of us is pretty consistent, and I certainly support it. I really like the idea of having it citywide in terms of that. And just as a quick anecdotal story, Councillor Wallace Richmond and I were approached last week by and I won't name the organizations and stuff like that, but a gentleman who is the Canadian head of a co-housing organization who have national homes. He was not selling anything or pitching anything to the city, but saying, here's an example of what we do. And it's for mainly seniors, 10 to 14 seniors who have their own bed sitting rooms, but they do have common kitchen facilities and common areas. And we didn't talk about this with him, even though we knew it was coming up, but he was just talking about the desirability of it. There are examples of this up and down the Okanagan, even locally, really close by. And so this is a type of text amendment that would provide a lot of clarity for organizations who are looking to do something different with co-housing. They would know that in all R4 and R5 potential situations, they've got the option to do this. So it's one example of it. I think that there are many creative ideas out there, and I think Councillor Wallace Richmond and I are, and actually the rest of the table are continually being approached by citizens in the community who've got ideas of things, and this will, in my view, permit this to happen more easily down the line. So certainly support it. On the other part of the what is essentially the public unveiling of the multiple housing affordable rental unit, the coming out party in some ways, even though we don't have the media here, this is so important that we're providing rental accommodation for families who our aunts and uncles and cousins will have an opportunity to have affordable housing, families can grow and move forward in life. So it is absolutely huge. I think everybody at this table recognizes that. And then the third one about the supportive bit, and again, this is an anticipatory thing. It is not related to this. It is and it isn't, but it's not the prime focus of this text amendment here right now. But we know that when people have stability in housing, they can move on with their lives. We know that. And so I'm looking forward to, in the very short-term future, that discussion about how we can provide support services for those who need to achieve that stability. So I'm certainly in support of.
Thank you. Councillor Wallace-Richmond.
Thanks for the second opportunity. Another question to staff. So can you tell us about the now public process, that if this is approved today, what happens next?
From the city's point of view, if, well, this proposal will go forward to the council meeting, and then council will decide on first and second reading of the zoning bylaw. And if council approves first and second reading, then the following council meeting, there would be a public hearing where afterwards council could grant third and final reading. So 2 council meetings in the bylaw could potentially be adopted.
And through you, your worship, is there a mechanism to, so typically a rezoning would involve informing the neighbors? Is there any sort of, does this trigger any sort of notification of current R4 or R5 owners?
That's a good question.
Yeah. The only notification necessary for this is advertisement in the newspaper and 2 consecutive ads, because there's more than 10 properties involved.
I see.
And so the legislation says that we don't have to notify all the property owners that this would affect if there's more than 10 properties involved.
Okay, great, thank you. And finally, I think it's important to say that there are a number of R4 and R5 zoned lots waiting for potential to develop. And I wonder if there's a way to trigger, if this is approved, I wonder if there's a way to trigger a process whereby those owners are notified of the text amendment so that they might consider that in their future plans.
Director of Development Services?
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you have if that was a question. I think it was.
Yes.
Your worship, we don't have a mechanism to do that unless there's a direction to do so, but that would be a unusual, out of the ordinary thing to do.
All right, okay, I'll think on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions from council? Okay, I have a few comments. So thank you for having the zoning map up, and Councillor Wallace-Richmond talked about this and the fact that there is some larger R4 medium density residential lots that have been zoned. And so of course the text amendment would enable those particular ones to move forward without a hearing. Could we look at the OCP next? I think perhaps as important, and the colors on this map are a little not quite right. The orange one is the high density, which is clear, but the so the darker yellow is the medium density, not the lighter yellow area. So what we're talking about with the zoning amendment is encouraging owners of lands that in the OCP have potential to be rezoned to think about it, even though they're not rezoned now. So I think that's an important piece to remember, that we're not just talking about those pieces of property that are already zoned R4 or R5. My further comments are, first of all, I appreciate the Director of Development Services and the work that he's done with BC Housing and CMHA in Salmon Arm. This has been a cooperative sort of a venture, and I think it's progressive. I'm glad you went through the history of the progression. because I think that's very relevant to what we're doing here. And CD zones are good when those particular uses are totally unique. We just did a CD 19 up in Hillcrest area, which was very unique. But since assisted living is now not just publicly owned, but privately owned, it is not so unique anymore. And we have accumulated a number of CD zones throughout the city that have assisted living. And I personally think it is now time to move to a broader spectrum where owners of other lands can consider it and not have to spot zone them. Of course, in the official community plan, if you want to rezone your property, if it's not R4 or R5 already, you would have to come and have a public hearing. So in those instances, there would be public input. So that's one of the reasons why I would support moving this forward. The second reason is clearly it is supported by the official community plan. And staff's done a good job of going through that and citing the language in the official community plan that supports assisted living throughout zones like R4 and R5. And so we need to move forward with was seen at the time of the official community plan as the progressive plan. And I agree that the timing is appropriate now to move forward with opening that up. So I will vote in favor as well, and we know that what the progress is as far as communicating with the community and the public hearing piece. Any other comments from council before we vote? Okay, I'll call a question. All those in favor? That passes unanimously. Thank you very much. We don't have any other pieces of business on this agenda. We have a motion to adjourn.
Moved by Councillor Cannon, seconded by Councillor Flynn, that the Development and Planning Services Committee meeting of April 15, 2019 be adjourned.
All those in favor? Thank you. So for those who are able, we'll gather in room 100, at least for briefly at least. Yeah.